Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Helen Barnard. And Helen is the Director of Policy and Partnerships at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Helen, a very warm welcome to you. Where do we find you this afternoon?
Hello. So I'm in a little village just outside Leeds, and I'm actually sitting facing the window in the upstairs of my house. It looks very professional, but it's my spare room. So behind that is a bed covered with most of the clothes we own. But I'm looking out onto fields, and they aren't there now, but we quite often get red kites hunting over the fields, which is lovely to look at when I'm ploughing away at my work.
Wonderful. I don't think there's a finer British bird than the kite, actually. It's beautiful. Yeah. And have you been working from home mainly? Have you managed to get out and about, or are you at home?
No, I'm at home. So we moved everybody into remote working last March. We had a brief kind of foray back into the office in the summer when it seemed like stuff was opening up again. And then, of course, we're all back home again. So no,
Yeah.
I'm here, my partner's working here, the kids are schooling here-ish.
Yeah. So the Director of Policy and Partnerships, that sounds rather grand. Helen, can you tell us a little bit about what that actually means in terms of your daily work?
Yeah, so the Policy and Partnerships team, it's really about solutions to poverty. So as you might know, so the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, we're a social change organisation. We're focused on trying to solve UK poverty. And we do that in different ways, but one of the ways is to try and come up with solutions that would actually free people from poverty. So that's what that team does. And I also, since I became director, I'm overseeing the other teams, so the communications and the evidence and so on. But it's all focused on trying to find ways to get people out of poverty.
Yeah. And just for people who might be a bit naive or not familiar with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, just tell us a little bit more about the charity.
Well, we were set up more than 100 years ago by the Rowntree family. So Joseph Rowntree and his son Seaborn Rowntree. So they were Quaker businessmen. They were around the same time as the Cadburys, that kind of the whole kind of doing good works through chocolate type time in our history. And they had this, what they did was they had this grocery business, and they set up kind of 3 charities around it, or 2 charities and another organisation. So the foundation, our focus is looking at the root causes of poverty. And in their time, they talked about social evils. So they had this whole thing that lots of people are doing back then, what they were called soup kitchens. And nobody is looking at how you actually change things so people don't need to rely on charity for the essentials. So that's our purpose. And then they set up various other charities, but we're also a housing association and a care provider. So we have what was then a kind of model village for the workers, which is now we run as a housing association.
Yeah. And those are those original founders still in the charity? Do you see them on walls, and do they get brought up in conversations and things?
I mean, not day to day very much, I don't think.
No.
I mean, I'm sure there's pictures around, although I can barely remember what the office looks like. But I think that I think some of the ideas I think still are there. So the idea of looking at root causes, not just treating the symptoms, is really important to us.
Yeah.
And I think also the idea that business and employers have a role to play in improving people's lives as well as turning a profit. That feels to me really relevant today.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was your driving force to get into this? How did you get to become Director of Policy and Partnerships? Have you got a long history working in the charity sector, or was it a kind of something that you felt for many years as a young person?
Well, I mean, I was a researcher by trade. So I kind of came out of university and I was really interested in doing research because I like finding out about stuff. I like talking to people, I like learning things. I like working out, if you put lots of bits of information together, do you come up with a picture that's more than the sum of its parts?
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do academic research because I wanted to do something that was closer to the real world. I wanted to feel like what I did is going to improve people's lives in some way. So I ended up doing research for different companies, kind of looking at benefits and housing and education, and then came over to the foundation to kind of commission research, but also to go further, to come up with, well, what does it mean in real life? How do you turn information into action, which is what we do now.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because in the news this week we're hearing about that we're going to be driven by the data. And as somebody who's not a great data guy, you know, one of these people that gets flat pack furniture, rips the box open and just gets stuck in. But there's a real need, isn't there, to understand data, would you say?
There is, and I think I always think when you're dealing with data and with kind of data analysts, it's really easy if you're not an analyst by trade. And my background isn't in kind of hardcore econometric modeling analysis stuff. It's easy to be intimidated and to not ask questions because they seem quite obvious. And one of the things I've learned over the last couple of decades is generally the obvious question is exactly the one you should be asking. And it's often you have lots of clever people and you say, hang on a minute, do we know why people are doing this? Or isn't it, aren't you missing out a group of people? And almost always it's the right thing to have asked, and it's something they know, but we're trying not to talk about too much. So I think being a kind of interested, curious, non-expert is really, really important.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen. In the JRF annual report on poverty, your charity raised this number of recommendations, and one that struck me was to see as many people as possible in good jobs, which I absolutely get. I think it's a wonderful kind of goal to strive for. But one of the things that struck me in working in the context of the last few months and poverty in Burnley is that some of these people who we want to have good jobs really are very low in confidence, low in self-esteem, and in actually with the skill sets maybe to go and put a decent CV together. I was wondering how you think we can help them to kind of just build them up a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's almost two sides to it, isn't there? Because I think what a lot of people find is they are trapped, they're caught in systems which are holding them back, and which, most people who I meet who are caught up in poverty are incredibly energetic and insightful and actually really competent, because living in poverty is really hard. The kind of making money stretch when there isn't enough of it. There's so many skills you need just to get through, but they're caught in systems. So they're caught in a labour market where the only jobs around are, the ones in restaurants and shops and so on, which aren't always, but often are low paid, but also you don't get much security. I think we've seen that through this pandemic. How many people who we now call key workers, and we've been clapping on our doorsteps, actually have no job security, have no idea what shifts they're going to get no sick pay, get no holiday pay, get no training, get no chance to progress from a kind of entry level job up to something that's better paid and that's letting them use more skills. So people are caught in this labour market where the only thing the only thing people are able to do is these really low level jobs, which don't give you the pay or the security you need. And similar with housing, so many people now, they're caught in a private housing sector, which is too often, your people are living in mouldy, damp, crowded accommodation that's also really expensive. So I think that feeling of just being caught and trapped is what erodes people's confidence and feeling that they can take control over their lives.
Yeah. Helen, something that struck me, I've lived in Burnley pretty much all my life, and there's always been those pockets of deprivation, those places that everybody knows in the town where it's evident there is poverty. I'm not saying there's not poverty in other places, but those places have always been there, and it's been through successive governments and successive councils. So I sometimes wonder who is to blame for this? Who is actually accountable? Or is it a bit like the institution of the Church of England that nobody actually takes accountability for anything and everybody's responsible? What's your take on that?
So I think to be honest, I think it's got to be on all of us. I think that it's too easy to look to one person or one group and say it's their fault. I actually think it's about the systems we've all designed. So there are things the government can and should be doing to free people, but there's also lots of things employers and business people can do. And, we're all consumers. So we all have power to a certain extent to say to the kind of big businesses that we do business, that we buy from, are you paying the living wage? Are you giving security? So I think we need to look at it has to be a joint effort. It has to be government plus employers plus communities plus service providers, and it only works if everyone gets on board with it.
Yeah. Helen, are there some success stories out there? And if they are, maybe you could share a couple where, we've seen areas of deprivation or we've seen areas of high poverty that have actually seen a turn to move away from being regarded as a place of poverty. Is that happening?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I was thinking about this. Should we be thinking about the place or about the people? So that's something. So when I think of, say, parts of East London, where I used to live in Whitechapel, there were parts of East London where if you compare what were they like in 2010, what were they like in 2019, they are much less deprived now. But actually, the way that happened is that most of the people who were in poverty have moved out because the rents went up and so on, and lots of better off people have moved in. So although the place is really different, and it's the same in parts of West London where I've got family, Willesden Green and places, you can see the place is different, but has it actually helped the people? Whereas I think, we have big success stories on a national scale. So if you take pensioner poverty, you go back 20 years and enormous numbers of pensioners were in poverty, and actually getting older was associated with the fear that you were going to live in poverty. And what we saw was as a nation, we more than halved the rate of pensioner poverty. That is just that's incredible. So now pensioners have the lowest rate of poverty of any group. And that's because we decided as a nation we were not going to put up with having our older people plunged into this. So I think, it shows how much you can do when you decide to do it.
Yeah.
So I think, it's kind of, we can definitely do it, but you need to decide and you need to keep at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. I'm just thinking, I completely agree. Just in terms of St Matthew's in Burnley, one of the things we're looking to champion is the plight of some tenants and how some private landlords get away with it, basically. Is this a nationwide issue in terms of standard of accommodation? We often put people in the lowest, people in deprivation, in poverty, we put them in the lowest form of accommodation, which seems, I don't know if they're expected to accept it as they've won the lottery, but the reality is that the accommodation is really not fit for purpose in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest changes I think in the last couple of decades has been in housing, has been in how many people now live in the private rented sector, and also what kinds of people. So the big thing we've seen is more and more people on low incomes crowded into the private rented sector, and more families on low incomes as well. And that's really not what that sector was ever designed for. But the root cause of it is that we haven't been building social houses. We haven't been building homes which are low cost, rented, good quality homes. And that we need to start doing that again, because what that will do is enable people who need good quality, low cost homes to move into them. But at the same time, we do need to improve. I mean, you're right, the private rented sector, it's really insecure and a lot of it is really poor quality. And we don't really have much of a system of enforcement, do we? No. So if you're living in a private rented flat, which is mouldy and dangerous and so on, I think there's two problems. One is that the enforcement system relies on you reporting it to your council and them sending an inspector around. There's no proactive kind of way of doing it. But also because it's so insecure, because landlords can choose to just evict you, if you put your head above and you say to a landlord, I need you to fix this, they can either just decide to evict you, or they can say, fine, I'll put the rent up and then you'll move out. So I think there is something really important about the balance in the housing market. So the balance of the kinds of houses so that people have choices, but then also the power. So, we need to get rid of no fault evictions so landlords can't simply kick you out. Absolutely. And we need to limit. So I think rent controls is in itself, it can be quite double-edged, but what we should do is limit the amount a landlord can raise your rent in a single year, so they can't just push it up to the point you can't pay it and evict you by the back door, which is what happens to people now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you think about this, Helen, but I'm toying with the idea of almost being a mouthpiece for some of these tenants and actually naming and shaming landlords. I mean, it might not win me any favours, and I might put me in a bit of deep water, but I just feel that some houses that I've seen are, pretty close to squalor, really, and I really, it breaks my heart to see that. I know you've got an invested interest on this because I saw you on a conference call the other day. But in terms of institutions and the land that they own, is that a way to seek out private sectors engaging in building low cost properties, like the Church of England and other huge institutions?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So the idea of naming and shaming individual landlords, I find that kind of worrying, because what it does is focus attention on an individual landlord who's behaving badly.
Yeah.
And that diverts attention from the fact we have an entire system designed to stop people getting into good quality homes and to keep them in poverty.
Yeah.
So I would say that, if you were going to use your platform, your passion, personally, I would rather you did it to lobby the council to build more social homes, lobby the government to build social homes, lobby them to put in protection for all tenants. Because, if you focus on, the danger is you focus on individual landlords and people feel better because they can, somebody's behaving badly and that person's been punished.
Yeah.
But it almost stops you making changes to the systems, because there'll always be another landlord to come along.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not gonna fix the bigger problem. Whereas
No.
if we fix the system, so we drive out all of that bad practice, but to do that, you have to give people choices. There has to be an alternative. Do you know what I mean? It is, as
what I think it is, Helen? I think it is. I think it's the pastor in me that wants to make a quick impact, and maybe a bit of the apathy that I find sometimes from local council and politicians that think, well, you can be a bit of lip service and then you want me to go away and forget about it. And I think that's probably where my passion for making noise comes from. But I do entirely get your point that, that obviously there is a process and legislation to follow. And in terms of people who own lots of land, do you think they've got a responsibility to engage in this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was really interesting. So as you said, we had the launch this week of the Archbishop of Canterbury's report on housing, the Housing Commission. And so a couple of weeks ago, I saw the kind of final report because I was speaking at the launch. And I remember thinking before I read it, I really hope that they've done a proper kind of look at the church as a landowner, because you can't publish a report that says we need lots more affordable housing and not say, and as a landowner, here's how we're going to contribute. It just wouldn't be credible, would it? So I think it is. And so I was really pleased to see that. I think it will only be probably a fairly small part of the bigger solution, but it does have to be the solution. I actually think the kind of problem which the church and church has, and which is a problem in the system, is actually land value, land prices. So one of the reasons it's so hard to build cheap housing or low cost housing for people is that the way our system works is that land is incredibly expensive to buy as soon as you've got planning permission. And that, again, it's something we need to change in that underlying system, because what you've got is lots of landowners getting sudden windfalls, basically, just because a bit of ground has got planning permission. They haven't done anything, they haven't earned it. No. But it drives up the cost, and that drives out low cost housing for people. So we need that to be rebalanced. But I think, the church is right. The church has a lot of wealth, a lot of land. It needs to show by doing, and that then gives it credibility to say, and other people need to step up as well.
Yeah. Just in terms of the influence of the church on matters like this, do you see a church moving in a positive direction? We've got all the dust and skeletons in the closet of years gone by, but do you working at the level that you do, Helen, are you optimistic about the church's desire to engage in these matters?
I am. I mean, I find it. Yeah. So yes, I am. I think so. At the moment, what I see, particularly the last decade or so, is churches, particularly like community churches, have ended up on the kind of front line of poverty, really. Because what we've seen is, as you've got kind of social security get cut, you've got lots of other cuts to local government. It's really churches are kind of, as the water's gone out, the churches are left there And so many people, so many churches now, either formally or informally, they run food banks, they run support services, a number of vicars and priests who keep bags of food in their homes because people come to the door because they're desperate. So I think that's really, really gained pace, I think. And that's then been reflected. I've seen it in the bishops, the way that the bishops and the Archbishop have become more and more outspoken on social issues. And it's funny because I was brought up in a very atheist household, and I studied history, and the kind of my historical perspective of the church has been much more as a kind of agent of social control, really, and the church's role in fairly oppressive power structures. Whereas I think what we see with the modern church, I don't know whether it's right, it feels to me it's kind of going back to more of its roots, which is about service and about reaching out and acting with compassion when you see people. But then adding to that, I think what's really good is you've got the kind of community-based work, which is about compassion. And then you've got the justice side of it, saying, actually, it isn't right that people have to come to total strangers and ask for help because they can't afford toilet roll. It's just appalling.
Yeah.
So I think the church speaking out to say, actually, we need a just solution. We should not be the answer to this.
Yeah.
I think is a great place for the church to be in, with all of its history and its skeletons and all the rest of the baggage.
Yes.
Its role, I think, is more important now than I suspect it's been for a long time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think there's a debate going on about whether COVID has been, well, it's not been good for anybody, but whether it's been a positive thing for the church in terms of what we can offer and how we go about our social engagement. And I think there's a debate going on about that at the moment. Can I just ask you, Helen, how you feel? There's lots of people, I think, almost starting the party a bit early in terms of coming out of COVID. There's lots of kind of, I don't know about you, but on my social media, every holiday company's advertising left, right, and centre, and trying to get our well-earned money off us and book a holiday, which we all want to do. But there's a long way to go with this COVID-19 in terms of after we've all been vaccinated. There's a problem that's going to need a lot of unsolving. How do you see that playing out in terms of poverty and destitution?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really worries me actually is so if you kind of look back at the last year of COVID, it's been an incredibly unequal experience. So, what we've seen is that people came into the pandemic really struggling, and it's the people who were struggling most who got hit hardest by the health and the economic impacts. So it's that kind of thing. We've all been in the same storm, but we haven't been in the same boat. Some of us were in yachts, which have, nice beds and everything, and some of us were on little rafts, and the seas got pretty stormy. At the moment, the thing that I'm most worried about is that the recovery kind of plays out in the same way, because you've got the people in yachts have been able to save loads. So if you've been able to keep your job, work safely from home, haven't been able to spend money, and you can cover your bills easily, you've got lots of people who've got lots and lots of savings. And actually, that's something you hear the Chancellor saying, the recovery is going to be powered by savings. And that's great for those people. But actually, you've got the whole other load of people who are on rafts. And what we see is that people have it's the opposite. People have built up more and more debt. They've got further and further behind. They've given up more and more essentials. So that kind of sense that you could, come out, half the country skips out of lockdown, goes to restaurants, books holidays. The other half come out on their knees, just, struggling to even make it to the supermarket instead of the food bank. So I think in a way, how do we make the recovery just and equal in the face of the pandemic having been so unequal and unjust? Oh, I think you're on mute. There you are. You're back again.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, it's just this what you've said is fascinating. But some people I know have been very open in talking to me about food banks, Helen, and they've said it's just stupid, which I agree with in that simple sentiment. But they just, some people just see it as something for nothing, and we're not helping them by helping them. We're not helping them go and earn a living, and we're not helping them gain self-worth, and it's not gonna help them go and find work, which disappoints me. It doesn't. I understand it, because I think there is that idea that you've got to work and you've got to earn what you live for. But what would your response be to those people that throw that at us?
So I think I've never met anyone who runs a food bank that wouldn't love to be able to close it tomorrow. And I've never met anyone who has to go to a food bank who wouldn't give anything for the dignity of going to the supermarket instead. You know, I think when we started doing research into destitution a few years ago, and I remember some of the early research we got back, which includes interviews with people about how it feels, about when they are relying on going without, relying on charity and so on. And one of the things that struck me most was people were talking about how humiliating it is to have to, and it's nothing to do with food banks or church, you know, people say we are treated wonderfully when we go there, but just the fact that I can't support my family, it's degrading, it's humiliating. So I think that, you know, that is something people feel really strongly. But I think that for me, it's not really the choice. It's kind of like, you know, if somebody has been skipping meals and isn't going to eat this weekend, the answer isn't to not give them food because they should really get a job. The answer is to give them food and help them get a job if that's what they can do. And I think, you know, people aren't always aware. So if you look at who's in poverty these days in this country, more than half of people in poverty are in working households. You know, so is it 6 in 10 children in poverty have a working parent? Poverty, the face of poverty today, isn't what it was 20, 30 years ago. The face of poverty today is, there's his mother that we work with. She works 2 jobs and she has to try and work out how she fits in a trip to the food bank in between her 2 jobs because the food bank's only open at certain hours.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, none of us want to live in a country where that's the case.
No.
But you don't fix it by withdrawing help. You fix it by providing the help so people stay afloat, and then fixing the systems that have forced them into that position.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Helen, because I think there's an idea in the ether that everybody who's using the food banks is from a certain demographic or a certain area or upbringing or whatever. But I can only concur with that, is that the people who've used our food bank during the pandemic have been from all walks of life, from rural villages, from people who've had well-paid jobs, for people who've you know, got debts, and yeah, it's right across the spectrum. And one of the other things that struck me when Pastor Mick and I were in the news was how many people just did not know about the level of poverty. And you know, we received hundreds of phone calls, and I received lots of calls from, and I say this very respectfully, from middle-aged women from the south of England who just rang me up and just said, I didn't know. Is it really like that? But yeah, I didn't know. And I found that quite stark, actually, that people out there just aren't aware. Is that your experience as well, Helen, or not?
So yes, I think that is often the case. Possibly less so than it used to be now. But I think, and what's interesting is, so those people who are calling you up may be calling from somewhere, a kind of leafy suburb in the southeast, calling you in Burnley to say, oh, things are bad up there. I wonder how many are aware that in their own areas, there will be people exactly like the people they saw on screen, struggling just as much. Yeah. And I think it's also, you kind of think, you know, think about in-work poverty. So the kind of sectors that have the highest levels of in-work poverty, if you take something like retail, like kind of shops, restaurants, care, social care, and so on, you've got, you know, around, 1 in 5 workers-ish in poverty in some of those sectors. So actually, when people who have the money are going to restaurants and staying in hotels and visiting grandma in a care home, what they won't realise is, you know, the nice bubbly young man or young woman who's waiting on their table could easily be going home to a situation where they can't afford to put food on their own table.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's one of the things that poverty is woven in with our daily lives.
Yeah.
But, you know, all of us have dignity, have pride. People don't wear poverty on their sleeve. They put the best face forward they can, and then they go home to a house where, you know, they can't afford to put the heating on, and they know they're having toast for dinner again.
Yeah. Helen, it's been really, really lovely talking to you. It's fascinating to get some insight into this. And I don't want this to be just an interview of poverty and doom and gloom in the world. I mean, I get, and I'm sure you do, I get a great deal of joy being able to help people. What are some of the joys for you? What gets you out of bed in the morning, Helen?
Lots of different things. So one of the things that I found that we've been doing a lot more of in the last few years is working directly with people who have experience of poverty themselves, because there's a kind of long history in the poverty field, as in lots of fields, of people acting on behalf of others, people kind of speaking on behalf of others, and those people with lived experience are kind of wheeled in to tell their heartrending story, but they're not part of the decision making. They're not part of coming up with the solution. And that can be, it's incredibly disempowering for people. So one of the things that I actually think I find most kind of rewarding is the work we've done, when actually what we've done is to support people in poverty to tell their own stories, to work with us to come up with solutions that they believe will work, and then advocate for them. And it is a proper partnership. So, we have access to, officials, to people who, decision makers. We can use our teams to get a media platform, actually kind of using that to bring into the room the people who have the most expertise, I think is absolutely fantastic. And that's something that we're trying to do more and more of. And I think you kind of think about universal credit and all the problems that people know about, all of them were predicted. And if at the beginning of that system, they had got in the room people who lived and breathed social security, and they designed that system with those people, I don't think any of it would ever have happened, because they would have said straight away, 5 weeks, we're not gonna be able to get through 5 weeks, mate. No, I don't want to take another loan and get into more debt. And it's that kind of, if you start involving people from the beginning, you just get much better solutions, better systems.
Yeah. And in terms of just saying as it is sometimes, I mean, Mick and I got an extraordinary response from that piece that we did just before Christmas, and I think we're still processing it, but it seems that because it was very real and we just said it as it was, it evoked emotion and response by all sorts of people. Do you think sometimes that's what we need, is just to tell it as it is?
Yeah, definitely. And we need to kind of connect, don't we? I think there is something, as individuals, all of us, we need to be able to feel we're connecting on a human level with other people in a different situation to us. And I think that's what those pieces do, is they kind of paint the picture for people of kind of not just saying, look, there is a lot of poverty, because actually lots of people do know that, but they don't know why, and they don't understand how it works in people's lives. So actually, I think the piece that you did, people still talk to me about it now. People still remember it because it's stuck in people's minds. And I think for me, it's telling a story that says, here is the big picture scale of this problem. Here is how it feels for the people inside it. Here is why they can't just get out of it. And here's the solution. I think it's, when we tell it like that, it feels empowering for people. People feel they can do something about it. Whereas I think, too often with these things, because people don't feel they can do anything, they switch off. You get, compassion fatigue, people call it. So I think you need to get over compassion fatigue by saying, let's have some justice. Let's fight for some solutions that mean you won't have to feel so much compassion.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen. Thank you. One question I've not asked you, which is a standard question on the Godcast, is have you ever been to Burnley?
Have I ever been to Burnley? I think I have. When I was doing lots of research, I spent years kind of basically pootling about places like Burnley and similar places, kind of going into people's homes, interviewing them. The thing I was always amazed at as a researcher, what people will tell you as a total stranger that they've known for all of 20 minutes. So you kind of go in, and I remember doing research. I was doing research on tax. It doesn't sound very interesting. I was doing research, talking to people about their kind of the tax system. What do they understand? What do they not understand? But of course, you start asking people about that, and it kind of sparks it. And people would just tell me these stories about their lives, which had nothing to do with what I was researching, but was fascinating and often quite hard to hear. You kind of talk to someone about your self-employment tax return, and they start telling you about the breakdown they had 4 months ago, which is why they hadn't done something, and so on. And it's I loved it. I really loved traveling around these kind of places and just being able to get people sharing their lives with you for a little bit.
That sounds very much a Burnley thing. That's I think there's lots of grandmas and granddads around here who just quite say that as it is. It struck me, I don't know if you ever saw the piece when the celebrity thing was on and Jordan was talking about his happy place, and they interviewed this old pensioner walking past Turf Moor saying, "Is Burnley a happy place?" And he kind of went, "Is it?" Because like, what's there to be happy about around here? You know, it's I love that kind of that side of northern life. Helen, it's been a real joy. Thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on the Godcast and sharing us a bit of your wisdom. And thanks for those who've watched this. You'll find more interviews and videos like this on the godcast.co.uk. But for now, thanks for tuning in and goodbye.
Thanks very much. Lovely to see you, Alex. Bye-bye.